Good morning again from my side here in this session that should have been presented to you by Vincent O'Connell and Uta Ammering. Both are very sorry not being able to join us today, partly due to sickness and health problems. So I'm wishing all the best, a great and good recovery. That, of course, extended to all here at the moment. So nonetheless, I'm very happy to run this session with you, and I'm very glad to have, at least at the moment, 3 speakers with me. And the title of the session we are going into is to link urban and rural ecosystems in policy, practice, and governance. So we have a broad spectrum of topics we are going to in detail, and it is my pleasure to welcome 3 speakers here. We have Alexandra Derenberg from the Center for Agricultural Landscape Research, ZALF, joining us. Alexandra is also affiliated to one of the Stadtland Plus projects from where we know one another, and it will be very exciting to learn from you and your work today. We have invited Wilson Caillou, who might step in later. He's at the moment still missing, but we are looking for him to join and establishing the connection. We have Klaus Ehrlich as well joining, who will have a look at the rural and urban economies in his presentation. Klaus, it's a pleasure to have you on board. And my dear friend and colleague Ramon Schwarzer is joining us as well. He, together with Peter Meyer from the US, has prepared insights also from an economic, from a fiscal perspective on the global challenges we face. And we will go into the meetings, in the presentations one by one. And as starting on the list, I have Alexandra. So Alexandra, I would hand to you the presentation, ask you to share your screen with the other participants for your presentation, and give the word to you. I invite, while you are sharing your screen, I invite you to participate in the chat, dear spectators of our live stream. If you have questions for my discussant participants here, please place them in the chat. I'm looking forward to them as they are. Alexandra, your presentation is up, seen nicely. I can hear you well, so the floor is yours.
Okay, then let's start. Stefan Bartko already introduced me. So my name is Alexandra Derenberg. I'm researcher in the project Regelrecht, which is dealing with land use conflicts, urban relations, but also the question of spatial justice and a case study of Schwerin. And I'm going to present an analytical concept which we needed in the project in order to frame and analyze our observations we made in this case study region. And I'm going to present this not ready-made concept, but want to share and discuss the concept with you. So we have, in general, in our case study region, but also other urban rural spaces, conflict, which are sometimes land use conflicts, not always. These land use conflicts are induced by land use changes quite often, but also the question like access to land or right of land regarding ecosystem services, but also other like financial aspects is the question how benefits and burdens are distributed among the urban and rural spaces, but also among actors in the spaces, which relates to the question of spatial and environmental justice. And we really aim to develop like sustainable land management strategies and good governance of ecosystem services. So here you see like this complex landscape pattern in the urban rural space. And we found that we have really complex interaction between urban and rural spaces, but also other spatial entities. And these interrelations can be complementary, mean there's an advantage or disadvantage of another space and which can provide like additional value for the other space. This can be synergistic, means benefiting for both parties. It can be conflicting or neutral. So we found that in our rural urban space setting, we have also like processes of coupling, decoupling, recoupling, which is quite prominent in the case of energy, means like wind power production in the rural spaces, like in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, but also like food. Food is increasingly globalized, and the external resources come from somewhere, and also the food itself is like being from somewhere, so it's not locally embedded, and like the use of resources do not, do not match with like the local resources. And then of course we have like ecosystem services flows. In the case of food, it's quite obvious, so we have always food flows between spatial areas, but also like other ecosystem services like tourism coming to a specific area and using the natural landscape there. So the question is how we can describe and analyze this interrelations between the spaces, and what are like the distribution of benefits. And we use the concept of telecoupling, which was developed in order to describe process around globalization and urbanization, but we want to make it use also for local telecoupling or local coupling. So the key features of this telecoupling concept that we have already covered. Human natural systems means we are dealing with ecological and socioeconomic aspects within the systems. We can describe externalities and undesirable impacts, which can be positive or negative, like in the case of reforestation measures, or like replacement of people induced by new landowners, international land trade, and things like that. And this concept allows also a structured and processual perspective on spaces, which can be defined maybe as urban, rural, or peri-urban, or also across different scales, like in the urban city region, or like national scales, or in a global context. And we are also able to follow or analyze ecosystem services flows within these systems. So the concept has been already used to develop relevant policies which deal with conservation measures, also ecosystem governance, tourism, and so on and so forth. So we took this telecoupling concept in order to study our urban-rural relations across different scales. So we use this concept. There are different concepts or different type of concepts around this telecoupling. And we chose the one of Econ, which is more extra-centered approach, dealing with governance aspects of this ecosystem service flows in our case, or this interrelation between urban and rural spaces. So we have like two different systems, which can be land system, but also like governance systems. And these systems across distant spaces are somewhat interconnected. It can be asymmetric flows or symmetric flows, also reflecting power imbalances between the spaces. And the flows are characterized like ecosystem services, resources, knowledge, energy, and so on and so forth. And these flows connect like places of production and consumption, means that, for example, in the case of ecosystem services, the service area is not the same like the provision area, which is often in the case of food production, for example. So then we have like a trigger in the system A, means we have changes in the policies or another demand for certain services. Also, external disturbances means that system A get a trigger from outside or inside, and then make a decision which cause direct impacts, which can be positive or negative in the same system, but on the other hand, also like hidden or unintended impacts, like spillovers in another system, which is called here B. So, and in this system, then we have also like indirect impacts, which can be positive or negative. So, for example, we have reforestation measures in a certain area, but which leads then to the unintended effect that the livelihood of dwellers is negatively or positively influenced. Then it becomes more complex. So we have in a system B, we have this effect and some actors putting pressure on policy and regulation in order to deal with this effect, because these unintended effects are often ungoverned. So they latent, maybe they are governed or not governed, but mainly not governed. And then this puts pressures on the policy system of the another system, means system A, which leads then to feedback processes in the governance structures, and in the long term, also maybe to institutional change. So far, this is like the established system. What we added here now is the question of conflicts. So we decided or found out that we have different kind of hidden or open conflicts within one system, like actors in a system having not the same opinion or having like target conflicts. We have target conflicts between the different systems. And we have also this aspects of distributional justice, so means how the effects are distributed in the sending system A, for example, and how the maybe negative impacts in the other system, which are unattended, are managed or mitigated. So means we have different kind of conflicts, which can be short-term or long-term, and which raises also questions about the governance of these conflicts, or how to solve the problems, and how we can really come to a cooperation between the spaces. So finally, I came up that we have not only this connection between distant and close places, but we have also aspects of multi-level governance. If you think, for example, like peri-urban spaces, they are usually governed by different jurisdictions, sectoral policies for different spaces. Means we have urban planning, we have leader programs for rural spaces and things like that. And then we have also like national policies, like energy policies, forcing renewable energy production, or we have also like non-governmental policies, like compensation payments for CO2 emissions and so on and so forth, which has influence on both systems. And the question is how the actors use their local action space. So they are not only multi-level governance, but if we are aware of the multiple effects and like triggers from outside, it might be good to know where they're induced and how we can manage. So what is the action space of the local actors, and what is then the next policy level which need to act? So, and we can cross-scale this about different units like urban city region, but also between rural spaces across the globe and things like that. And we really argue that it's important not to look only on the telecoupling effects, but also look what is happening in the region. Means we have like distance and proximity, means local and telecoupled systems in the case of ecosystem services. And this approach allows us also to include governance and justice aspects. So it's not only about its impacts, but also how we can create awareness about its different governance issues. So in planning practice, this approach might be too complex, so it's not really of practical relevance at the moment, but it might support the implementation, evaluation of governance instruments and arrangements, thinking about unintended impacts of local or regional or national policies in other regions. So my questions for discussion could be, do we really need this spatial categories like urban, rural, or do we have sending and receiving spaces, or how we can sufficiently delineate the spaces like for cities and peri-urban rural areas if we need to define the system boundaries of the studied systems? So Another question relates to the question of governance. So we have governance for spaces of place, or do we have governance for spaces of flows, which is relevant like in the food system or governing ecosystem services? And more general question, how we come from this description analysis, which can be well done, to really practical solutions for conflicts and enhancing cooperation between urban and rural spaces. And another question might be how we can quantify the impacts and balance the benefits and burdens among the spaces. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the SALF. Alexander, thanks for this rich presentation and this introduction to this concept. I'm looking, and we will be looking into the feed if questions arise. One thing that I immediately thought about in your presentation was the concept of multi-level change, the transition theory concepts by Gales and others. And I'm came to this point in the moment when you said at a certain time that the effects that you are describing could then lead in the long run to institutional change. Whereas this transition theory approaches to a certain degree say there are niches that are maybe the initiators of change, and that in case of windows of opportunities in a stable regime will then be those allowing for also for more immediate institutional change. So not only change in the long run. So the point I'm heading to is maybe once more to ask you about your perception on this temporal scale on which the institutional changes take place.
So in the case study it's quite difficult, but in general we have like really short-term changes or long-term changes, or like in the case of institutional change. And yeah, the question is how flexible the systems are or how reactive. So if you have really, like, as I said before, there are also like weak feedback loops. There is no institutional change induced. So maybe there are some problems or some benefits in the receiving region, but this will not lead to institutional change. Or I think I have problems with the internet connection.
You're still at least well connected here.
Okay.
Thanks for this. And I'd like to ask you, Jus Knopp, who is, as many of you saw already in the chat, connected with us and supporting, to let us know if there and which questions have been coming up in the mobile event app. Julius?
Yeah, sure. So there have been 2 questions so far, but since we are working with a bit of delay, that might be more during the session. So the first one is, can you please say more about the land use conflicts you identified? For example, did you also try to develop possible solutions to reduce the conflicts?
So the land use conflicts were mainly studied by my colleague Maike Fienitz, and I studied them from an ecosystem service perspective. So we have like conflicts around access to ecosystem services, but also really like trade-offs. And yeah, the conflicts, like we have in the case of Schwerin, we have an area, a city with less than 100,000 inhabitants, but with a high share of nature protection areas, and on the one hand, and also like quite intensive agriculture. So we have, for example, the case that there is water pollution from agriculture in this protected area, but also conflicts around tourism and settlement. So there's also lack for compensation areas in the urban space in the city of Schwerin. And then the question where this compensation measures can be implemented. So this is then maybe the hinterland of the city or the closing Landkreise counties. And this causes, of course, conflicts, because there's like also, as I said before, a decoupling or discoupling or disconnection in the case of compensation payments or compensation areas, and the ecosystem services provision. And this might also cause conflicts if you have land use changes in the urban area and then compensation measurements somewhere else. So.
Thank you. And you also said there is a second question, maybe with a not really short, but with a bit shorter reply, if that's possible, regarding the question. Let's see.
Okay, so the second question would be, how is the urban-rural land use aspect concretely allocated to the system A or B? Or is the telecoupling concept based on a general approach?
This telecoupling can be used for different like spatial contexts. As I said before, we can use it for like big cities being coupling with other cities at another continent or so. But as I said, we argue that we can use it also to study local coupling and telecoupling. So we have like not only this multi-level governance, but also like triggers or policy decision or decision by value chain actors, whatever, which have influence on our small space, like the city of Turin with this counties around it.
Thank you very much. Was there any late drop in, Julius? Or
yeah, there was one fourth question which just popped up, so I'll just read it out once again. So the third question was, to which extent do policymakers consider ecosystem services during settlement development? And did you yourself develop a strategy to raise awareness for ecosystem services?
Yeah, frankly spoken, it's quite difficult. So the concept is known, but for example, landscape planners usually work with the concept of landscape function or like forest or forest functions. So I would say in the planning system there, this concept is not well established. And this is also like a result from other studies or like from Christine Fürst and others, that the concept is quite prominent in research, but did not feed into planning practice so far, and maybe it's too complex or do not address the demands or the needs of this planning actors. So it might be a good concept if it's like communicated in a way that is understandable, but so far it's not easy to implement in a planning practice, I would say.
Thank you very much for taking this one. I can also add from a project that I've been in touch with that was supporting the Directorate General Environment of the European Commission, where ecosystem services of soils have been analyzed and also brought into connection with the planning profession. That this is the case as you describe it. It's quite well known, but it's not really in the daily practice of concern, although there are first steps, and I will be posting it a bit later on the Wall of Ideas as maybe an additional resource in this regard. With that, for the moment, Alexandra, thanks a lot for the insights. We can most likely continue the discussions also then with the later speakers in a concluding discussion towards the end of the section. For now, I would like to invite all of us to go somewhat to Spain for the European Federation of Rural Tourism. We have connected Klaus Ehrlich to us. Klaus, I hope you can hear us and
yes.
Will enable your camera. So yes, you are doing perfectly. Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here. And when you're ready, please share your screen with the audience. You will talk us through a presentation on linking the rural and urban economies through tourism and recreation. So linked to the aesthetics ecosystem services in particular, most likely, but the floor should be yours to tell us what you are about.
Okay, let's see if this works. You should see the screen now.
It comes now, indeed.
Yeah, beautiful, right? Okay, good morning, everybody. I will make a short presentation about myself. I studied Diplom-Kaufmann, all German audience, Diplom-Kaufmann in Siegen University in then Western Germany, and moved to Spain in '85, co-founder of the Rural Tourism Association in the region, and since 2003, general manager or secretary general of the European Federation of Rural Tourism, Countryside Tourism. Shortly, what is this? But very quickly, just to give you an overview, I come from the pure practice, so it's quite a difference to the previous, very conceptual presentation. Our federation is a provider; it's a tourism industry structure.
Sorry for interrupting. Is there a possibility that you can increase the size of your screen a little bit? We see it about on 2/3 of the page. If it's not possible,
it should. Does this help at the moment?
Perfectly. Now it's absolutely full screen. Thank you.
Okay, fine. This is strange because it should share the full, just the frame of the PowerPoint. Okay, fine, great, no problem. So we're a private industry structure, and we look at market economy. We work with politics, but of course, as a lobby from lobbying side, from the private side. This is the structure: 34 members from 30 countries, and we work with what is countryside rural tourism, which means it's not only farm tourism. It's private accommodation, but up to a family-size run enterprise. So we are not talking about big holidays, center parks, or things like this, plus related gastronomy activities and external services. Okay, so this is where I come from. Quick history, also very fast. This picture on the left is me when I was 7 years old or something like this. The whole topic of countryside tourism is organized since 1955. First as a complementary income for agriculture, then it went into the rural development policy with the LEADER program, LEADER approach since 85, 86. Through internet, it made a huge jump. It's still widely domestic clientele, and this is where the urban rural relation comes into game. But it is now a full international product. In some countries, it's 20-30% of international visitors, which is pretty high. And very interesting in the actual situation, in the recovery time, especially this last summer of the tourism sector, this type of tourism really worked well because it's not massified, it's small units, and it was about the only sector of tourism that had a pretty good season, generally speaking. But move into practice. First of all, I would suggest to forget about the old term rural tourism and speak in general about sustainable recreation, which includes tourism in rural territory. This is what we talk about nowadays. Nobody sets up huge complexes anymore. Everybody has understood that in rural areas, you need smaller, integrated, sustainable structures in accommodation, in services, in management. We still have the old structures. We still have the original farm tourism, agrotourism, only active farm. But as we will see, if we look at economic impact, at income flows, these two ones are too small. They don't let the full potential come up. And we change also from looking at individual tourist services as we did in the past. You see this on the left. We need to look at the integrated market-based management of all the resources we have in the rural territory under market experience. And now you'll see an example case from Spain. This was an abandoned village in the Extremadura area, and it's widely reconstructed based on leisure, recreation, weekend homes, etc., and getting back life into it through tourism, because the agriculture was taken away by the lake you see there, which was artificial dam. So first point, money-wise. Again, we come from private sector, we look at money, we look at income flow. That's the way, how do we earn money from these rich urbans who are fed up of cars and noise? And I think any economist knows what a multiplier is. So this slide comes a bit from a more other audience. So I move very quick through it. Just a practical example. Let's take a spending on accommodation of 100 euros. Let's take a small occupancy rate, 25%, which in tourism sector is pretty low, but for rural tourism, maybe it's quite normal. 9,200 euros direct income, 30% we know is spent on accommodation, which means the total spending is about 30,000. We have a local economic multiplier. In tourism in general, 1.5, 1.6. In rural, with a good local integration of spending with local resources, local people, local inputs used, we can go up to 2. That's a bit optimistic. I admit 1.8 is more realistic. But anyway, we get about, from these 9,200 in accommodation, we get about, for the local economy, about 60,000. So this is pretty interesting. It works, of course, when we have a strong local circular economy, strong integration of local providers, not buying the wine from 600 kilometers away, but maybe not from the village, but from a place 50 kilometers away. So we create this local effect. And now I come to something that I remembered from my studies in economics. Die Thünenischen Kreise. This is one of the oldest approaches of urban-rural relationship. And this, I think, is, if I'm not wrong, about 200 years old. So this topic is not so new, as we can find out. And it's a two-way relationship. Now, in fact, Thünen looked at how the city is resourced from the surrounding countryside. With tourism, we have a different way. With tourism, we move from visitors, move and pay for the use of rural assets, which was no idea for Thünen when he invented his idea. And what I would look like is the retroalimentation effect that this has for a flow back from rural to urban. Okay, visitors pay for use of rural assets, landscape, quiet, health, food, and logistics, and that's an interesting point. They carry supply from urban to rural areas of any kind. The vans go full with stuff into rural areas. And what do rural areas? Well, they do what von Thünen already said. They supply food and materials, but they also trigger through this tourism flow, they trigger new demands. And these are the ones where we can work a lot on. The visitors not only consume the local produce when they're there, they may want it afterwards. What was, and there we find another point. In the past, there was the transaction, the transport cost. For a small quantity of goods from a rural area to urban, it was just too expensive to send it. For one single ham or one single cheese, it was no way. It was more expensive to transport than the product. So this didn't work. What happens with logistics? The Amazon brings goods into the village and the van returns empty. So why don't we use, just as an example, these existing logistic transport that can take these small units at a very low cost back into the urban demand. So there's a lot of new ways nowadays where we can physically overcome and bring more long-term physical relationship of small but highly priced, highly added value for the local economy goods back into the urban consumer. If we look at the impact, the objective extending the impact for local community, we look at only at the local produce of small services to local clients, and we have this amount, which is the traditional rural tourism understanding. If we look only farm to own client, it's even less. So these models in tourism should not be talked about if we talk really about the relevant impact. What we need at least is that the full local and regional economy works with in a local bubble and joins together to reach finally this objective, which I would like to stress very much as a potential, that this local produce only goes not only goes to the visitors who ask it, but he recommends this to a friend in the city, and this friend in the city who never was in the rural area also will want to buy. We have this phenomenon already in eco-production, for example, in the local buyer circles that join together. They never visited the producer, but they join together, they create economy of scale, and they bring these products at a good price for the producer into the urban area. So this is the potential that is absolutely underexploited at the moment. And we think that tourism can play a very, very good role on this. So what to do? And I'm almost through. First of all, we need communication and these kind of circular urban-rural relations based on the tourism flow into rural areas that triggers a new demand of flows out of rural areas of goods and maybe services. So for this one, we have Facebook Tube. These just appear related. Very important and very interesting. We need to engage with the small and the big distribution. For transport, we need to deal with Amazon. For accommodation booking, we need to deal with booking.com. We need to deal with Google, but we also need to deal with a small bioladen at the corner who has a contact with a small provider. I just remind you, in Germany, you know this, eco-food, eco-agricultural products only got really relevant on the market when Lidl started selling them, not because of the many bioläden. It worked when Lidl made his massive eco-food department. Then this suddenly triggered off because it's a question of volume, and we cannot ignore that this is relevant. We need the big players on board and the small ones. Of course, technology and logistics. I commented the return travel of Amazon delivery, but there's another thing coming up in the future, which are drones. And this will make it even more interesting because the drone flies, supplies one thing in the village, picks up another, flies back, and there's not even people involved. The problem of these small quantities, high-priced goods, is that the transfer costs were high in the past, and this is going down. And of course, all this goes together with the digital transformation of economy and society. So this was my short message. Well, now I'll be a bit publicity. This is the tradition, as it often happens. This one would be the urban, this one would be the rural, and they both want to eat, and they both look for the food, and then they start fighting, and they start fighting even more, and then they find out that it doesn't work like this, and then they do this. First, eat both one side, eat the others. Vielen Dank. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Klaus. Fantastic presentation, nice pictures. It was a pleasure to gain these many insights, also with examples across Europe. You've touching on the digitalization with the big companies indeed, and also started from the tourism point and its implications. I would be interested personally, before going also into the chat again for the other participants, I'd be interested, we heard about the digital ways of doing tourism with the, I remember the Faroe Island idea of having your own guide with the camera showing you the islands. Where do you see in this times of pandemic for the moment the implications of what you have presented us, in particular for the tourism sector?
First of all, as I said, our sector is very happy with this season because everybody that didn't dare to go to a big destination came to us. This will not last. I'm quite realistic. Crisis like COVID accelerates processes that were already underway. We'll see this, especially in digital. We see it. We never would have thought a year ago to have this kind of Congress virtual, and now everybody does it, and it works very fine. Many people even found out it works better than the presential ones. What we clearly find is that digital services and practical use of digital technology helps to externalize a lot of small practical tasks that people had to do physically before. This has an impact on employment, of course, but this is not that much a problem in rural areas. It helps to get information over very quickly. So in my times in university, this was the transfer cost problem in economy. It's not just the price of production, it's also the price of getting the product from the production side to the consumer. And this is going very much down through logistics, which are optimized through digital and through the very fast communication that is possible through the digital services. Did this answer your question?
It does indeed. Alexandra is, I think, adding also in this discussion, or in the opinion, would you like to share your point on that too?
Yeah, because we had like a session yesterday dealing with regional value chains. And then we found out, for example, in the case of also Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, from the Vorpommern Connect project, there's like a mismatch between the size of farms and the type of products produced there and the demand of regional food producers doing like quality food or really have a unique selling position by providing certain crafts or whatever. And then the other aspects deals with the question, so how we can achieve also ecological or social sustainable development in the spaces. So if we have only Amazon doing the logistics for the actors there, means where's the added value for the region? So we have maybe a cheap solution for the logistics, but maybe if we have regional suppliers, the added value for the region would be higher.
This is, I remember this question when I went to university, the first shopping center started outside the cities, and this was the same discussion. Will these shopping centers kill the city centers? Well, they killed them or they forced them to innovate. And I would rather look at the positive aspect of this. We cannot deny the importance of economy of scale. This is absolutely the point that makes things accessible and makes them payable. When we look at logistics, there is no reason why, because Amazon also works with a lot of subcontracting in the transport, in the logistics. They have small companies that work locally. They're not just doing everything themselves. Just to give an example, I live in a city, but I get Amazon a delivery from 4 or 5 different logistic companies, depending on where they take it from, where they bring it to. When we look at drones, they can be based in the village or in the city. There can even be a drone service, a new setup of logistics drone service. This is still future dream. This is 5-10 years. But we need to basically look, as you commented the result from Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, the point really is the size of production that the individual farm or small producer can put on the market is too expensive, too difficult to bring to the consumer at the moment. This is where we need to work on. And this is where traditionally we work with a full lorry that goes, and that's the point, this full lorry goes specifically empty to the rural areas to bring it back full into the city. Now, what I'm thinking about, and digital optimization can help a lot on this one, especially when it's not perishable goods, when it's goods that can be brought today or in 5 days. It's not fresh vegetable. That's another thing. We have a lot of empty lorries. I live in Almeria, which is a European mass producer for your tomatoes you eat right now. They come from us probably. These lorries go full up to Germany. And if you need to transport anything back from Germany, you get ridiculously cheap prices because they go empty back. And this is the thing we need to play on, to optimize and to use things that are already going on and achieve that these logistics are not only just one way, they are used both ways. And we can probably integrate, especially at a local level. Also, Amazon doesn't want to pass from one village to another one, to another one, to another one, to pick up things. So this can be organized locally. And again, we have a local added value for organizing this, bringing these things to one pickup point. And this creates local employment, and then a bigger one that just does it better and cheaper does the next stop. It's a multimodal structure, but the potential is there.
Thank you, Klaus. Indeed, what you're describing is, on the one hand, a very complex system with things interacted or actually not interacted, and where we need to establish the critical links. And it very nicely seems to be a good case description as well, like Alexandra, for your conceptual approach to the systems design. It's a very good to have these more theoretical, conceptual approach and your practical experiences here brought together in this session. I'd like to ask Julius once more if from the mayor participants we have also questions, and after that then Raimund would be joining in our discussion.
Yeah, hello there. As of yet, we don't have any questions to this talk in particular, but I would still like to invite the audience to pose any questions as we go, and then we can maybe transfer them to the general discussion at the end of this session. So, yeah.
Thank you, Julius. Yeah, feel invited to join. Thank you for the moment, and indeed I like to then also save maybe some of the questions for final discussions amongst all the three of us. Next on our speaker list for, I think, on another level an introduction to the topic will be Professor Ramon Schwarzer. He's a professor at the European University in Frankfurt-Oder and is member here at the Helmholtz Center for Environmental Research, responsible for the climate economics. Raimund is collaborating on this one with Peter Meyer from Louisville University in the US, and will talk about climate resilient infrastructure finance, renewable energies, a global challenge, and the role of citizen co-ownership. Raimund, we are very excited to learn from you. You will switch your presentation to presentation mode, please, and then the floor is yours. We cannot yet hear you if you're... We will set up this just in a second. I don't know, we should be able to hear you. It worked out nicely beforehand. Now we have your presentation in full screen. Thanks for that. But I still can't hear you. Julius, I'm not sure if you can.
No, I can't, but I have unmuted our next speaker, so he should be able to talk.
Do you know, Julius, if we have a landline number to join? So Raimund could call in as well, I think, with the meeting number.
Yeah, sure. Let me check.
So we are just looking for a solution to optimize the digitalization process we have at our fingertips. I can see and hear that, Klaus, your mic is still open, but we try to connect to Raimund and then So your screen was shared, is shared perfectly. Also, best regards to Alexander in the back of Ramon. But your mic seems to be muted on your end mechanically, maybe.
If you want to try something, maybe next to the mute button on your streaming service on your Cisco, there's a small arrow with a pop-up next to it, and there you can choose manually the micro which you want to use. You might want to give that a try. Unfortunately, there's no landline number to connect to this session, I'm afraid.
Then I said, because we have been in touch with Ramon, we were able to, I have another idea, another sort of brilliant idea. Ramon, I will give you a call to your phone, then we'll make available my loudspeaker, and maybe this one will work out. That would be what we in German call, don't get me wrong, a Russian solution, but maybe it works. The connection is too bad this way, I'm afraid. Bei euch scheint mechanisch das Mikrofon ausgeschaltet zu sein. Kannst du noch einmal einfach rausgehen aus dem Webex und dich wieder einmelden? Ja. So Ramon will just exit our background room once and then come back. And I would like to use the time, Alexandra, Klaus, we've been looking and we are looking at very complex systems. If you would be just allowed to name one leverage element, one critical element of that system, which would you concentrate on in your analysis? I don't want to ask you which one is really driving it, but where would be your, let's say, your biggest interest in? Maybe it's not the most important one, but where is your interest in the most? Alexandra, maybe to ask you.
Yeah, we had like yesterday also the discussion about justice and the session about of Thomas White, and there was also the question about recognition. So I think it's not only about this intended and unintended effects, which then cause problems with recognition. So if we do not know about the impacts which are caused by the decision in one system, also the question of recognition is difficult. So I think we should be really aware about what happens if we do this or that in one system, and that it might cause effects, externalities or positive impacts in another system. So means our decisions, for example, in one specific region has impacts on a distant base, can be urban or rural, but also in a global perspective. And this is also very challenging for like governance issues. So I'm not sure.
Okay, no, thank you.
Answer the question.
That's an approach. And we are just trying the connections again. Still come back, log in, did not work, but we are trying the idea with the telephone once more. Klaus, what is your maybe focus point if you now had the time and the resources to read a lot of books or to watch movies and exchange with experts? What would be your focus? And after that, I see we can go to Raimund, who is now connected. But Klaus, of course, first to you.
Yeah.
Okay, very quickly. As I said, I come from practically from a business point of view, not from a academic or research point of view, conceptual. So the practical thing we always find when we see new, especially in countries where this is still kicking off, this use of rural areas for recreation. is something that's absolutely common in Germany or in France or in Switzerland and Austria, but it was very new for all Eastern European countries and for most Southern European countries. The critical thing is local leadership in the community. You need an open mind. Rural areas tend to be conservative. They tend to be reluctant to try new things. The active population, the imaginative or dynamic people move into the urban areas. They create their wealth in urban areas because in their rural surroundings in their society, they feel locked in. And this is the main problem, which is it's always blaming the cities that they are so absorbing everything. But what rural areas really need to understand is they need to be active themselves. They cannot just cry and see how bad it is and how bad is farming and how everybody's exploiting. They need to understand that it is in part because their governance, their local power and their local society structure is blocking or is frustrating anybody who wants to do something new. And this is a very critical thing which is often forgotten, this social and cultural dynamic, which is just giving the advantage to urban areas. That's the point where the difference is. And we need to work on that. We need to encourage, give freedom, give space, maybe in a certain way incentivize entrepreneurs in rural areas, make it easy for them, and give them the support they may not have from the local community, give them the support from outside.
Hören Sie mich?
Thank you for your insights, Klaus. We tried to establish the connection to Raimund now. Raimund, this is our test.
Ja, hören Sie mich?
Ja, you're quite, du bist noch recht leise, aber wir hören dich. We can hear you. You're quite
soft. Nur aufsetzen.
Perfect. So now we are able to continue. But I'm not worried for this interruption because it's been very exciting insights, interesting insights from Alexander and Klaus and Roy. So thanks for sharing these views with us. And Raimund, with that, the floor is yours. Thanks for joining us and apologies for the inconvenience. Please try to have the mic a bit closer to you.
Hören Sie mich jetzt? Kann ich mal kurz fragen, hören Sie mich?
You are very silent or not very loud. Maybe you can just...
This one I can increase here. That's easy. Danke erst einmal. So, das müsste jetzt lauter sein. Hören Sie mich lauter?
It's a bit louder. It's maybe 50% of the original, but maybe the spectators can also put up their volume during your speak and then we'll reduce it later on. So I think we can go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, we should. Yeah, sorry very much. Here was a technical problem on my side. So yeah, with this delay, I want to introduce you to climate resilient infrastructure finance and the role of co-ownership by citizens. It's a tour de force through what is usually a lecture of 45 minutes on the political economy of finance for resilient infrastructure. I should indicate it is a joint work with Peter Meyer, formerly from the University of Kentucky, who we are both jointly collaborating in the Urban Climate Change Research Network, where most of our work can be found. As I say, a very short tour de force to the economic thinking on this path, just to make one point. That is that the infrastructure finance issues that are usually put forward, well, comes to the point that we have the need to establish local co-benefits in terms of revenues to a project planning, and give you a very minuscule example how that could work out. So running through the argument, the dominant narrative of all the great organizations like CCFLA, the G20 or the World Economic Forum is that we need trillions of dollars for worldwide climate infrastructure in finance. but only have some millions, or sorry, billions in English terms. So, also Billionen zu Milliarden, über die wir hier sprechen. So thousands of what is needed available in climate finance. The problem that is usually perceived as the root cause is that cities are not creditworthy in international financial markets. On the private financial markets, you find sufficient funding, but cities are usually, let's say Jakarta is not creditworthy as a city that holds for the 500 largest city where only 4% are seen to be creditworthy. And of course, relating to our debate of today, that will be even worse if we consider rural or suburban areas as creditors. But, and this is the dominant narrative led to various efforts of international organizations like the World Bank to improve the creditworthiness of urban creditors. Reality is, in our view, a little different from the dominant narrative. Public infrastructure is often seen to be too expensive rather than not accessible. And if we think about cities like Leipzig or Wuppertal, it shouldn't be the problem of being creditworthy in markets, but it's about making the economic arguments in favor of resilient infrastructure investment. And often the needs of the cities are more immediate towards near-term problems rather than long-term problems, so the lacking long-term vision. And on the economic part of it, and I'm an economist by background, the answer is relatively simple. We need to look towards a longer-term period, so lifetime accounting, and we need to consider to give carbon a price, so it's considered a risk if it's not low carbon in its investment. So the question is, well, what we have three elements, so to speak: the element of access, the element of bankability, so the making the economic argument for a low carbon investment, and we have the need of local political support. And after deeply looking into the issues, we both are convinced that the local political support is probably the largest bottleneck of all. But let's look into the elements a little more. Before, I probably need to qualify a little on the needs, really. The needs are for greening investment is actually less than often stated. This is an exercise from the London School of Economics. I'm going to be just brief to say, well, we need about the large need of infrastructure investment. It's actually driven in the base case by general infrastructure investment. So road, bridges, etc., dams, dikes, whatever you think of. There is actually infrastructure need of any sort in view of a tremendous move in urbanization throughout the world. Greening this general infrastructure would only cost an increment of about in some 14 trillion US dollar. So it's just a marginal element of, so to speak, about 15% is the additional cost of greening or mainstreaming this general infrastructure need. And it's getting much less if you consider the savings that we have from green infrastructure. And the most important element of saving, the single largest point, so to speak, of the savings from greening the infrastructure is avoided carbon risk. The carbon risk is here is considered to be the risk of stranded assets. So changes into technologies where through markets or regulation which render economic assets, for example, oil and gas infrastructure, suddenly worthless, as we have seen in coal infrastructure most recently. And if this is considered as a risk element into the economic calculus, it will change the bankability for green investment towards fossil fuel-based investment tremendously. I will not deal much about what we understand, what is our definition of climate resilient infrastructure, just give it to you. We consider at this stage climate resilient infrastructure as a mix of hard and soft infrastructure that is resilient to climate variability and climate change. So it's also considering disaster risk reduction, and it's also considering training programs and early warning elements. The triad, and I think now I can get a little more slow in presenting, that we usually think of as an economist, given the lack of penetration of infrastructure investment with regard to with low carbon or with low risk, so to speak, in investment, is that we for the climate infrastructure finance depends very much in its calculus on the risk of high future cost of carbon. That is what we want to change through carbon risk disclosure. So if there is some element of potential stranded assets in the future, let's say on gas and oil, it needs to be disclosed in investment to get some favorable interest rate compared to high risk investments. So this is not about general interest, it's interest driven by risk, in particular here carbon risk. So with carbon risk disclosure, we would favor climate resilient investment for exactly establishing the risk. We need as a tool, so to speak, carbon pricing. So let's say some tax on carbon or some prices coming from carbon trading, emission trading markets. They would change the picture with regard to the choice of low carbon investment. So we have this triad of carbon pricing, driving or informing carbon risk disclosure, and some rules on carbon risk disclosure will favor carbon infrastructure finance in terms of resilient infrastructure finance. So from this point of view, carbon pricing is really necessary for achieving the bankability of low carbon and climate resilient infrastructure finance. Well, this has recently been crowned, so to speak, in Germany with a prize of the Deutsche Bundesumweltstiftung for Ottmar Edenhofer for so to speak advancing exactly the idea of carbon pricing. It is necessary, it's significant, but in our view, it's not sufficient. Why? Well, sorry, why? It's too early to answer. First is let us look at where we stay with the carbon pricing in the world. In the world of carbon pricing is essentially growing quickly in the last few decades. It started in 2005 with the European emission trading system. It was driven finally with, or lately with developments in Asia, Japan and China. And we see some voluntary internal carbon pricing all over the world. And I guess with the change in administration in the United States, we will see even a furthering of the penetration of carbon pricing in the world through emission trading schemes. So very hopeful signs with regard, but there is some inherent limit to carbon pricing that shows, well, wherever we go, it will not be enough. So it may be necessary, but not sufficient. One element is the prices exist, but currently the methods to establish such prices are very diverse, I must say. So it's partly along emission trading, partly along taxes, partly along some internal calculus of previous previous experience with this project, so enterprise-specific methods such as fees. All of those methods has an inherent structural limit, which is they are based on marginal abatement costs. So how much would it cost to a company to avoid carbon emissions or general greenhouse gas emissions? And if you like some economic graphs, we always used to work with graphs where we can somehow establish an optimum. Let's say we want to reduce, in the view of the cost of carbon, the amount of emission to be reduced. We would usually reach out for the point where the marginal abatement cost equals the social cost of carbon. But we know as long as we are not at the optimum, and we are definitely far off the optimum currently, the cap that we set for emission reduction will produce a market price much below what is needed for achieving the optimum. So even if we are successful with standardization of carbon pricing, we would only reach effective carbon pricing, but not the social cost of carbon. So any methods which are not based on the social cost of carbon will not deliver towards the need. It will help with regard to bankability, but it will be too low to achieve what we want to achieve. And that's where political will comes into play, especially local political will. And the message here is we can improve bankability, we can improve access, but it will not suffice to have a real game-changing element in what is decided at the local level, as long as we don't influence systematically the local political will. And that it can be done partly through supra-local policies such as the Paris Agreement, but it depends also very much on the framing of climate action as producing local co-benefits to constituencies at the urban and rural level. So that was a lecture of 45 minutes condensed to 10, I hope. And whenever I end at this point, the question comes, but can you give me a meaningful example? Just something that I can understand how it would work. And I was thinking at this stage, I go beyond what I usually do in the lecture in front of students, and give you an example how that could work. Now I have a German audience, as I understand, so probably some of you are even aware of this. Well, so it's a very small example to show how, to demonstrate how this local development benefit framework could work out that we are developing at the U of Z. Well, it's not from low carbon, it's actually a water policy issue here. We know clean surface water is a problem to most large cities in the world. This little example is about using capital credit to invest in stormwater tanks. I will give you shortly the technical details. For me, more interesting, and hopefully for you as well, is the idea to make citizens becoming co-owner of such water purification systems. And the finance construct that we follow is in the acquisition loan for this project could be repaid through using some local economic benefits that we need to transform into local revenues generated, for example, from money saved by avoiding past pollution cleanup, profits from commercial use of the surface of stormwater tanks, taxes which are reflecting the increased value of real estate in the vicinity of that, and economic benefits stemming from clean city water. So here comes the problem at hand. Storm overflow driven by heavy rain mostly occurs in sewage infrastructure. Some of the water in stormwater overflow doesn't move to the sewage system, but runs in the overflow situation into the water bodies, streams, rivers, or lakes. A typical situation that occurs everywhere. Well, you can work on it in various ways. This is a low-cost way, using just some, I must say, plastic tanks, so to speak, in overflow hotspots, and where the overflow water is stored for a period of time and then pumped back to the sewage system so that it can be cleansed as supposed. Its potential usage, which delivers towards the revenues here, the benefits to the locality, is that this can be either used as recreational areas, or if it's, you could use water plants. Sorry, you could use plants to partly also clean up the water already. So where you don't have water purification system, you can use exactly this temporary storage as an element of the sewage purification, which you can do as long as it's overloaded or where no system exists. So many potential usage. For an economist, the most important element is what are the economic elements of it. We have some direct costs that are saved from through this measure. For example, currently Berlin spends about 500,000 euro per year for dissolving oxygen to the water body of the Spree. You could save pollution discharge fees of, or partly of it, part of it at least, through this measure. If it's used, you have some missed benefits. You have, from this approach, you can deliver ecosystem and biodiversity benefits. Sorry, you have some. If it's as it is in the vicinity of neighborhoods, you save transportation costs for city residents for recreational use. If you compare Munich to the Isar, to Berlin and the Spree, you can think of a totally different way of living with water bodies in an area where it's part of recreation in the vicinity, which is usually not in Berlin. And of course, every city must envision that the EU Clean Water Directive is actually asking all European cities to comply anyway within the next decade or so with higher water quality standards. So you can't avoid not reacting in any way to the issues of stormwater overflow. So and this needs to be, so the economic benefits, and if you want also the political benefits, needs to be translated into revenues. Well, that is very easy along the line, as I have already listed. Use the saved cost from pollution cleanup, the renting out of the newly created spaces for coffees, restaurants, recreational areas, show places, whatever. Fees for the clean river commercial use, for example, fishing licenses, boat rental, lease of beaches, etc. And you can have some subsidies to the planning from promoting because they are promoting economic benefits from a clean city river. For example, increased touristic attractiveness, increased investment that flow to Berlin, regional business activities, job creation, wages and maintenance costs, in as much as they are local business. So this creates your revenue stream, various ways on how to include this finance-wise. One model is the stock ownership model. That could, for example, look like this. You have of course, the majority of investment will come from the city of Berlin. but it's going into a holding which could, not necessarily must, but could involve some household trust where the households in the vicinity of this facility contribute to this holding in some form and also get out something of this holding through a trust company. And we actually, this is a calculus that has not been done by me, but a dear colleague at the university, I should indicate. But basically, it's just to understand conceptually how that works. We have the investment out of the holding into the stormwater tanks, could be, for example, about 62 along the riverside. And we have some revenues that were indicated earlier that goes into the holding. Of course, as this is, so to speak, a nature-based solution, it will get favorable conditions through also bank financing, let's say working with the KfW, the state bank, which can provide a low interest loan based on this nature-based concept, which were handed out to commercial banks to the holding. So various ways to do this.
Ramon, I need to ask you to come to your concluding points for the presentation, looking at the time. Thank you.
Yeah, I just concluding, well, it's there. You should know it's a demonstration project. You touch on it. And here comes my conclusion and the take-home messages. Very quick. Well, access to capital is necessary, but as I hopefully could make the point, it's not sufficient. Bankability of such programs can be facilitated by effective carbon pricing, but carbon pricing alone will not suffice and does not create the political will where it's needed. Only the recognition of co-benefits will help cities to overcome their orientation towards minimizing the short-term budget cost of their infrastructure investment. And one way to do it is citizen co-ownership. It produces acceptance. It helps create the constituency will to it. And as such, this program is a measure of success and an element of success of the supra-national influences, such as the Paris Agreement. So that was short but lot.
But you did put it nicely into the nutshell in the end. I think the key messages are clear. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. Maybe if it's possible, you can share your camera with us for the final discussion round. At the moment, it's not activated. And we do have a question here from the speaker side, which was indicated to me. Hi, Ramon, good to see you. Alexandra, you had something on your mind to contribute. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. It's not a question, but a comment, because if you think about like this green or blue infrastructure and the investment cost, so it's often said that yes, we have the solutions, but we cannot finance it, or like the space is a problem. And the colleague really present nice example how this financial problems can be solved if we calculate differently. So we do not look on the investment costs, but on the saving or the cost savings. So what is the, also from a financial perspective, what is the added value? Despite this, I have one comment about this estimation that, for example, suburban spaces or rural area have less possibilities, or their bankability or their liability in the banking system is lower than of the urban spaces, because we have also very poor cities. So maybe it's the other way around, that we have really wealthy suburban spaces which can do this investment without any problems. So it's maybe not only the core city, but also the suburban spaces.
Would agree. Well, that as I say, I have a US collaborator on this. Well, and if you think about, let's say, the large urban areas, it will probably adhere to this this assumption that rural areas are more difficult to finance than cities are. I think, especially if we think about the developed, so to speak, developed world, a difficult term here, but the industrialized world, you often have cities being more favorable in creditors than small villages, so to speak, as such. But of course, I can think about each situation. I just want to indicate we probably have to look into where the problem sits. It's in generally the access to private capital markets, except for the case of Wuppertal, I wouldn't know any German city who is not creditworthy.
Thank you for adding this point. And I finally would like to ask Julius if there have been any further questions in the mobile event app or contributions to the wall of ideas.
No, as far as I can see, not. But there was still one question we missed concerning the first talk of you, Mrs. Derenberg. So the question was, if I may ask, what could be done to foster interdisciplinarity among the actors? That was the only question left in the chat.
A difficult question, Alexandra, with the kind request for a short answer, if that's possible.
Yeah, that's true.
I would say there are always trade-offs between like sectoral approaches and multi-sectoral approaches, but also like disciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches. So even if we talk about cross-sectoral or integrated concepts for rural spaces or city regions, there might be also trade-offs. So you have to look very precise from your problem and then decide if a transdisciplinary approach is really feasible and productive for solving the problems there.
Thank you very much. And a final, please, we just have 30 seconds left, so I just start a sentence and you can complete it. Ramon, interdisciplinarity works out for you if?
Yeah, if we start at the same language, we need a joint terminology and a joint goal.
Thanks a lot. Important points, indeed. And Klaus, also to you the question, interdisciplinarity is beneficial and fruitful because?
It helps people to understand each other's situation, point of view, and to find jointly solutions which you would never find if you stay in your own bubble.
Thanks a lot. Thank you all for having joined this session. It faced some digital challenges, which we mastered in the end, at least with respect to having had a very, from my perspective, interesting discussions, 3 different perspectives. It was a pleasure having you here. I invite you all to take a short break and we continue at 11:15 in the next parallel sessions. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.